Hey everyone, welcome back to Taylosive Finance Tips. This has been an interesting series and I've enjoyed interacting with you guys on it, so we're just gonna keep on moving. Today I wanted to specifically talk about lifestyle creep, which I've brought up to many people in the past and a lot of them didn't seem to have an idea what it was. So I thought, because we have a lot of younger people watching, or maybe just people that want to learn more in general, it would be a good day to explain it, dive into it, and also explain how I was impacted by it pretty heavily. So for those who don't know, lifestyle creep is essentially when your income is going up, so you're pursuing new jobs or you got a promotion or new career options, and now you're making a lot more money than you used to, but because of that, your spending habits have not changed. And that means that as your income goes up, you look at it as just having more disposable income, so your spending goes up. And before you know it, you could be making 10 times what you used to make, but you're still living paycheck to paycheck. Or you're still not saving or investing as much as you could because you're just looking at your new expenses as, wow, I can afford all that now. So that's great. I can buy this, I can buy this, I can subscribe to that program, or I can get a loan on this because I can afford that monthly installment. And it means you never really get ahead in life, even though you're making way more than you used to. This is a growing problem in our culture, and I think it's particularly bad with YouTubers. I know, because lifestyle creep, or maybe I should refer to it more as like business creep, it kind of plays a similar role even if you're running your own business or running your own YouTube channel and that kind of thing, because YouTubers, it's fairly common for them to suddenly get a lot of views or watch time or revenue within a short period of time. And of course, YouTube has no guidance. They have no, step program that walks you through, okay, here's what happens when you make this much, and here's what happens when you make this much. So because there's kind of no rules on it, and because YouTube is so unpredictable, it's fairly common that a channel will take off, start making way more money than they're accustomed to, and because of that, start spending way more money than they realize they should, or inflating their expenses because they just go, well, I can afford it, so what's the problem? It's basically taking a poor financial mindset and applying it with a couple zeros at the end, right? So it means for someone like me, I just figured what all YouTubers do, what happens when they start hitting it big. Well, I gotta move out of their parents' house, obviously. It was time for me to do that anyway, but they also gotta get an office, and usually get a pretty big office, or hire an editor and have other people start working for you. This is just what you see other YouTubers do all the time, so you figure, well, I'm making more money, my channel is growing, so I should go through the motions, and I should go through the steps that all other YouTube channels have gone through. So in the short term, this can pretty much work. I mean, just because you have money, I don't think it necessarily means you're smart with it, because I never went into debt when I started doing those things, and I started hiring people or renting big offices because I always saw YouTubers with big studios and offices, and I thought that would be cool to have lots of space and things like that. And because I had enough money to do it, I would subscribe to services all the time that I would be like, oh yeah, I want Amazon Prime, I want Twitch Turbo, I want the 4K Netflix plan. Yeah, let's subscribe to all this stuff because you can technically afford it. And my logic for the longest time was to not really budget, not really look at my expenses, basically just look at my bank account, and if there was something in there that was higher than what it used to be a month ago, then I took it as I'm fine because I'm not in debt, I'm not running out of money, so I guess I'm good. But the problem with looking at things so small like that and just focusing on the month-to-month cost is it, like I said, never really allows you to get ahead in life. It never allows you to accommodate for the bad times, like the times we're going through right now, where you're not really sure what your income's gonna be, and you're not really sure what's gonna happen if some things change and your income drastically decreases, and suddenly you're like, how am I gonna pay my bills? How am I gonna pay my rent for this big place I've rented out myself? So you can get in a lot of trouble really quickly if you're not prepared and you don't have those savings accounts and you don't have money invested for the long term. Because at the end of the day, you could find a really nice apartment or a really nice house or a really nice office. I don't know what you're doing, but this applies to all of that stuff. And just because you find a good deal on it and you're able to pay for it monthly, it's still probably, if you're playing the long-term game, gonna end up costing more than if you try to find a way to pay for something outright. Because when you do something like buy a house, eventually you won't have to pay a mortgage or you won't have to pay rent on that property, and the value of it typically, over the grand scheme of time, will go up. That's infinitely cheaper than just paying for rent, unless you're gonna be in a place for a short period of time and you know how long you're gonna be in a certain area. Then renting makes more sense. I'm not trying to diss everybody who rents, I'm just just saying it's very easy to not plan for the long term and suddenly realize, oh, you've spent tens of thousands of dollars that you're never going to get back. Whereas investing in something for the long term, eventually those payments will end. But lifestyle creep is absolutely something I wish I could have caught a lot sooner, because once I started realizing how much money I was spending on things that I was never really going to get back, and a lot of it just came from that expectations. You know, once you hit it big as a YouTuber, once you hit a certain number of subscribers, you have to do X, Y, Z, because that's what you watch happen all the time, right? So I know that doesn't apply to all of you guys watching, but I think that can apply in your social circles as well, because you think, well, my friends, you know, they moved out and they got this nice apartment, or they moved out and they got this nice rental, so I obviously need to do those things too as I get a job and I make more money. And if they're able to go out and party and drink and go eat out at restaurants and stuff like that, I should be able to do that too, right? So it can kind of be formulated by your social circles, and I'm not saying they're bad friends or anything. It's just realize how much money you're willing to spend to fit in those social circles you interact with. Because in the short term, it may not feel like they're setting you back that much, but in the long term, it can really impact you greatly, because you're spending money that could be spent on more long-term things, whether it be savings accounts or properties or investing in the stock market, which me and Louise are just now experimenting with ourselves. It's also one of the reasons I've chosen to never do sponsorships on my YouTube channels. It's a real easy way for your budget to get inflated real quick, and then you to accommodate that with extra expenses, because a lot of people just look at extra income as, oh, I get to spend that extra $1,000 on something, to the point that they start looking for things that they don't even need. They just know, I have extra money, I better spend it somewhere because I don't want it just sitting in a bank account somewhere. And that can be a really dangerous way of thinking, because it goes towards things that you don't even necessarily need. You just think of it as extra free buffer zone. So when YouTube channels get sponsors, they oftentimes get a bunch of money up front, and then they see that and they realize they can put it into monthly expenses, whether it be loans or rentals that they pay for monthly, or whatever services you can think of. But you can grow your YouTube channel or your business of any kind to a point where you now expect these things on a monthly basis. So the most tricky part about falling into that lifestyle creep and having your income go up and your expenses go up with it is that it's incredibly difficult to go backwards. I know, because I had to go backwards myself. If you guys have been watching for a long time, you know that. You know there was a time where I had way more office space and I had people working for me, and it took a whole lot of rethinking for me to get to the point of, you know what, this isn't a good idea, because if something happened with YouTube and our income was in trouble, I would not have 3 to 6 months of savings to live off of. So I'm, in a way, kind of living paycheck to paycheck. And because you get it all hyped up in your mind, you're like, okay, now I have the big office, or now I have the people, or now I have that car you really like, or this apartment you really like, or this rental you really like, that you can technically afford because you have the money for it, but it means that very little money is going towards savings, or very little money is going towards things that you can eventually own yourself outright. And being able to sit down with yourself and just kind of realize, hey, I made some financial choices that I'm locked into right now, but they weren't good ones, and in the future, I'm actually going to downgrade myself. I'm going to work in a smaller environment. I'm going to work with less people. I'm going to live in a less nice apartment or a less nice rental, because I realize I should be saving, or I should be putting money aside and planning for the worst, or investing money into things that I can own outright in the future. It's really tricky to do that. I know. It's a mind game you have to play with yourself, because it almost feels wrong to downgrade anything if you feel like your financial situation really isn't compromising. You know, it's one thing if suddenly your income goes away and you're like, okay, I can't afford this car, or this apartment, or this rental anymore, so I have to downgrade because of my financial situation. But what's even more difficult is having no change in your financial situation, or personally in my case, having financials do well. It was like, hey, our income's fine, we can still pay for all the things we're paying for now, but just understanding there's better ways we can spend our money, and there's better things we can invest in, so I'm going to downgrade despite things doing fine. It's like you're punishing yourself. It's like, why would I accept less than what I have currently if I'm making just as much, or if more, than what I had before? Going backwards in your career, or going backwards in your quality of life, is a really difficult thing to do, because you get accustomed to it, and you're living in places, or driving vehicles, or working with people that you've just expected for a long time. For years, some of you, or months, depending on, you know, how your expenses have inflated along with your lifestyle. You become entitled to those things things because you feel like they're yours, and you feel like, well, I've made enough so I can afford all these things, but it means oftentimes there's no safety net, and you put your position of financial independence at way later in life than what it could be if you settle down on your expenses, realize what you really need to prioritize now so that you can have a much better future later, you know? It's kind of what becoming an adult is all about in a lot of ways. It's delaying that instant gratification, because when we're a baby, when we're a child, we want everything right now. You know, if you take candy away from a baby, they're going to start crying because they want that thing right now. But that transition of moving away from being a child or even a young adult or a teenager and becoming more responsible is realizing what I'm doing right now might be kind of upsetting, because I have things that I've wanted for a long time, and now I'm going to let go of them for the greater good, because it's going to secure my future and mean that I can get things that I never thought I could in the lot nearer future. So for me and my wife's example, you know, I had been paying for this big office space that I'd been working in for a long time, and I just got accustomed to having that much working environment because I'd wanted more room to work. I'd wanted a dedicated office and studio with different rooms for a long time. But once we realized how much our overhead was per month, it was like, this isn't really smart. And am I pouring my money into something that really doesn't make that big a difference? You know, you guys watching my videos, do you honestly watch me because my backgrounds are good enough? Or do you watch me because sometimes I would shoot at a different angle compared to previous times? I mean, maybe some of you did. Maybe some of you guys just watched because it looked professional to have a different background and stuff. But what I was realizing over the months of working in those big office spaces was people were complaining about them all the time. They were like, yeah, that paint doesn't look right, or that soundproofing tile is off, or that white shelf isn't aligned with the other white shelf. There were all kinds of complaints, and yet I was pouring all this money into it, and yet I realized that's not why I want people watching my videos. If you're watching my videos, I'm hoping that you're watching because you feel like I have something to say, or you think I'm interesting, or provide some type of insight on a topic that you can relate to, or maybe disagree with, but at least respect the thought that goes into it. And I realized that, okay, that's the main reason I want people to watch me. Why am I spending all this money on my background if it's just going to be blurred out by the camera anyway? So that line of thinking was able to convince me that I needed to downsize, and I needed to start working from home because I could save thousands of dollars a month if I just settled and understood, okay, this is going to kind of suck to get rid of a bunch of furniture and get rid of a bunch of things that I'm accustomed to having and just work in a smaller space that is one of the smaller workplaces I've ever had throughout my YouTube career, but it's just enough for what I need it to be. And you know what we noticed? It didn't impact performance of the channel. In fact, we're still experiencing pretty steady growth across the Tailosive network in 2019 and in 2020. So if you don't believe me, I mean, the first time I hit 1 million views was in this very room that I'm recording right now. And the most viewed video on the Tailosive Talks channel is driving my grandmother around in a Tesla Model 3, and that had nothing to do with all that money I was pouring into the office. So at the end of the day, it was an expectation. I thought I'm supposed to do this because this is what YouTubers do. But at the end, it really had no impact on the performance of the channel at all, because some of my best performing videos, in fact, the best performing videos I've ever done, were all done in this house. And rethinking our budget and rethinking our lifestyle to say, hey, you know what? Let's not spend, $500 a month on food. Just because we can doesn't mean it's a good idea. And just because we can afford to get loans on cars or buy really expensive houses or commit ourselves to really, really long-term debt doesn't mean we should. And what's crazy to think about is a year ago today, we were not even thinking about buying a house. Back then, we were just renting a house that we were living in. It was about the same size as this one, and we were fine with it, but we just decided, hey, there's 2 bedrooms at home, and if we're not spending all this money on utilities and rent, then we could put a lot more money towards buying a house one day, or putting it in a savings account so that we have 3 to 6 months of emergency fund in the event of something like what's happening right now, a pandemic where people are getting laid off, we don't know what the economy's doing, and we don't really know how long these stay-at-home orders are gonna last. But man, in hindsight, are we glad we did what we did, because now, of course, we own this house outright, no mortgage, no rent. Monthly expenses are way, way lower than what they used to be, and that means that we're safer and that we can last in the event of a crisis. And yeah, it means that we don't get to have a studio that's as nice or as big, as much flexibility with recording and backgrounds and stuff like that, which is fun. I don't deny that it's cool to have all that working environment space, but man, I gotta be honest though, if we still had all of those office spaces and all of that utility and all those monthly expenses during this crisis, Tailosive would have been in a lot bigger trouble than it is right now. because we're doing fine, but if we had no fallback plan, you know, things could have gone south very, very quickly. So I know a lot of you are probably not experiencing lifestyle creep right now because, you know, very little people's income is increasing at this point, and a lot of us are having to rethink the way we work, or a lot of us aren't working right now, which I wish you guys all the best. But at the end of the day, I hope my finance advice for those of you who are yet to become adults or yet to become independent on your own can help you realize, like, hey, just because the income goes up or just because I can afford to buy these nice things I've wanted for a long time doesn't mean I should. And I do apologize if you guys watching the Talos of Tech channel makes you feel like you need to buy the latest iPhone or the latest iPad or the best Mac. That's really not the legacy I want to leave on people. You know, settle with the phone or iPad or computer you have now if you can live with it, because that lifestyle creep is a killer, and that can put people in some really, really tough situations just because you can technically afford something and therefore not really have a backup plan if things go wrong. But keep in mind, guys, I'm still very young. I'm still very new at this whole life thing. I've only been doing YouTube full-time for 3 years, so I have a lot to learn, and I'm sure some of you out there are probably much more experienced than I am, so feel free to spread your knowledge and advice down in the comments below, or feel free to hit me up over on Twitter. Join my Discord if you have any follow-up questions or more things you want to ask. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Take care.